Earlier, we spoke with Washington Post chief correspondent Dan Balz about Trump's response.
It's a very extraordinary situation that now exists. You have the former director of the FBI under oath before the Senate Intelligence Committee making a series of accusations about what the President of the United States said to him, particularly about the Flynn investigation and about other matters. And you now have the President of the United States essentially saying that Director Comey committed perjury in that appearance and that he is willing to testify under oath before the special counsel. Their stories are diametrically opposed, except on the question of whether Comey had told him numerous times that he was not personally under investigation in the Russia investigation. On that point, they agree. But on everything else, they disagree. Somebody's not telling the truth, and if in fact Bob Mueller takes him up on his offer to testify under oath, which I think everyone has assumed at some point that could happen, somebody is going to be in great legal jeopardy.
Dan, good to see you. On a lot of these issues, there's just no wiggle room. One person is telling the truth or the other is. But when the president was asked by Jonathan Karl just now whether Comey lied, Trump wouldn't reuse that word. He just said that's not what happened. And I wonder if it's possible there's kind of a disagreement in interpretation when Trump said, "I hope you can see clear to letting Flynn go." Comey yesterday pushed back very hard that when the president says he hopes for something, he takes that as a directive. But can Trump reasonably say, no, I didn't direct him to do it, I just suggested a preference?
He might, but he also said he never said that. I mean, as he pointed out in the press conference, he said, "I never said that, but if I had said it, people today say there's nothing wrong with me having said that." So in a sense, he's trying to have it both ways on that. He's denied using anything close to the words that Director Comey put in his mouth, while at the same time saying, well, if I did say that, there's nothing wrong with it. So, you know, in terms of their strategy, they're going to have to figure out which side of that they want to come down on. Or do they come down on the side of, no, I deny ever having said anything like that to Director Comey, or do they say, well, I said something like that, but it was not in any way an order, and for him to take it as an order would have been totally wrong on his part.
All right, Dan, what do you make of this potential legal complaint that White House lawyers are possibly drawing up against Comey?
Well, I think we have to wait and see if they actually file it, because as we know, President Trump has a history of making statements that he's going to file some kind of legal action against people who have in one way or another offended him, and then has not made good on that. I mean, he's certainly been litigious throughout his business career, but there were moments in the campaign when he said he was going to file suit against the New York Times, for example, which never came to pass. So, let's see whether this actually turns into a formal complaint. But let's say it happens. What Director Comey did was turn over memos he had written, and that he was a private citizen at the time he turned them over. As somebody in our office said today, well, what's the difference between that and somebody using their notes to write a memoir once they leave government? So I don't know that he has strong legal ground to stand on. The memos were not classified as far as we know, so it's not as though Director Comey leaked classified information to our understanding of it.
Let's take a breath for a second and consider what exactly we heard yesterday, because coming out of that testimony, Trump claimed he was vindicated. Some lawmakers, of course, especially on the Democratic side, saw the testimony very differently. Do we have a sense? How do we adjudicate that question? Was the testimony good for Trump or not?
Well, it was not good for Trump. Let's begin with that. This was an hours-long session in which the former director was essentially saying the President of the United States has acted improperly at a minimum, and perhaps illegally, but that's certainly out into the distance to be resolved.
And can't be trusted.
And that he didn't personally trust him, and that's why he kept contemporaneous notes of all of their conversations. He accused the president of lying about certain things in the way that the president has now accused him of lying. So there was that on the one hand. It was very damning testimony. On the other hand, there were things that he was not able to say. As he said, that the president did not order him directly to stop the Flynn investigation. As he said, that he conceded that there were situations where he could have stood up to the president but did not. He never indicated that because of what the president had done, he felt the need to resign or take stronger action. And so there are questions about why he didn't do more if, in fact, the president had crossed a line illegally. So on the one hand, it was damning. On the other hand, it was not definitive.
You know, Dan, something that Senator Angus King said yesterday in the aftermath of the testimony was that he actually thought the most disturbing thing to come out of the hearing was when Senator Manchin posed a question to James Comey that did President Trump ever express any concern about what the Russians did in terms of meddling with the 2016 election, and Comey very flatly said no. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's an important element, although we've known from the beginning that the president has not been willing to buy into the intelligence community's findings that the Russians were truly trying to interfere and put their thumb on the scale in terms of the election. He has at various points kind of grudgingly accepted the intelligence community findings, but then at other points he's described it as a hoax and as the investigation as a witch hunt. And so he's equivocated enough on that that it's clear that this is not a burning issue with him to try to get to the bottom of that. I thought there were a couple of other moments in that testimony that were important. Director Comey was asked at one point about was there any evidence of the president colluding with the Russians? And he said he would not answer that in open session. Now, that's not a yes by any means, but it was a curious answer given everything we've known that up to then, or up to some time ago, the president wasn't under personal investigation on the collusion case. I thought the other thing that was interesting was that Director Comey not only acknowledged that he had engineered the leak of his memos in order to get that information into the public domain, but that he had done it with the expressed hope that it would lead to the appointment of a special counsel, which, as we know, we now have. That part remains curious at a minimum to me as to why he felt he needed to take action to try to spur the appointment of a special counsel. What else was in his mind about what he knows or what's going on that led him to believe that that was the only proper course for this investigation to go?
Right. It seems to be growing tentacles, which, if you're being investigated in Washington, is not a good thing. So there's a reason, Dan, that you have one of the best offices in that Washington Post newsroom. You've been around a while. You've seen a lot of these things. How do you make sense of the trajectory of this? Does it feel like we're headed to something big, or does it feel like we keep waiting for a big revelation that never quite happens, and it's just kind of a lot of smoke that doesn't add up to all that much?
Well, there is a lot of smoke. There's a lot of seriousness to this, but I think that it always behooves us in a situation like this not to come to a conclusion in our own minds and kind of work back from there and then try to fit everything that is happening in real time into that conclusion. There is so much that we don't know. A lot of this evidence continues to remain murky. We know that there are new fronts to this investigation. The latest front clearly is an investigation into what the President of the United States did. I mean, everything that Director Comey has and that he laid out yesterday is in the hands of the special counsel at this point, and that presumably has now taken this investigation beyond the question of what happened during the 2016 election directly into the White House and to the conduct of the president. Again, I think we have to be careful not to leap to conclusions, but there are a lot of investigative threads that these prosecutors are looking at, and I think we have to have some patience in letting it unfold in the normal course of the way these investigations unfold.
Okay, Dan, I do have a question for you. Do you think that Special Counsel Mueller is going to actually question President Trump? I mean, now that the idea of the investigation into Russia collusion is now sort of morphing into potentially the president's conduct within the Oval Office, does President Trump now become somebody that Mueller will actually talk with when maybe before he wouldn't have?
Well, I think that based on what Jim Comey testified to yesterday, there are now questions that the President of the United States probably will be asked to answer under oath. You know, up until a few weeks ago, you would not have said that. You would not have assumed that the president would be drawn directly into some kind of a deposition or an interview by the special counsel. But you can now see that as a distinct possibility. And with the President of the United States saying today, as explicitly as he did, that he's prepared to do that, to talk to Bob Mueller under oath, I would think that people would think the director would be foolish or negligent not to take him up on that, to try to resolve what are clear contradictions at this point between the accounts of the only two people, Jim Comey and President Trump, who were involved in these meetings and conversations.
Absolutely.
Okay, Dan, one more thing here. We just got a statement, which you probably haven't seen, so we'll just get your quick reaction to it. Mark Kasowitz, Trump's lawyer, responding to the response of his statement yesterday. Comey had testified that he only leaked these documents because the president was already tweeting about them. And then in a statement yesterday, Trump's campaign said, no, the timeline is different. The comments had already come out in this New York Times story before the president's tweets, but pushing back on that today, just now, the president's lawyer saying that was misreporting, that our statement was accurate and was not referring to the May 16, 2017 story. Rather, Mr. Comey's written statement, which he testified he prepared from his written memo, describes the details of the January dinner in virtual verbatim language. This is A, in the weeds, and B, you're just having to respond to it after me just telling you about it. But what does this back and forth mean, and is it significant, and how so?
I don't know how significant that is. I mean, it's clear that the president's personal attorney, Mr. Kasowitz, is going to be very aggressive at this point in refuting and responding to things. I mean, we saw that yesterday in the way he came out and went after Comey's testimony, and I suspect we are going to continue to see that. That's in part the nature of these kinds of investigations. I mean, they are both legal and political. They have a public element to them, and this is part of what's going on. Ultimately, it will be left to Bob Mueller and his team of investigators to tell us what all of this ultimately means.
All right, Dan Balz with the Washington Post, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.